الإرهاب الدولي الذين استخدمهم الأسد وعلى رأسهم إرهابيو حزب الله.
Good afternoon and thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim and these are today's top stories. The Lebanese army says that more than 25 kilograms of explosives, rockets and grenades were used in yesterday's suicide bombing which targeted the town of Hirmid. Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Ra'i and Future Bloc MP Fouad Sanyura condemned Hirmid's bombing, and Sanyura says steps should be taken to avoid the repercussions of the Syrian conflict. Syrian activists say fighters linked to al-Qaeda have killed 26 people in the northern city of Aleppo. The Lebanese army says that more than 25 kilograms of explosives, rockets and grenades were used in the suicide bombing that targeted the town of Hirmid yesterday. The explosion happened at a patrol station in Hirmid, a stronghold of Hezbollah, when the bombers set the explosives inside the Grand Cherokee. The Al-Nusra Front in Lebanon, a group named after an al-Qaeda Syrian affiliate, claimed the attack on Twitter, saying it was a suicide bombing in response to Hezbollah's involvement in Syria. Health Minister Ali Hassan Khalil says the blast left at least 3 people dead and 28 injured. The relatives of a Palestinian man shot dead in the southern refugee camp of Ain al-Helwe have blocked main roads to protest his murder. The national news agency says Wissam Abulkil, a member of Fatah, died after masked men shot him near the camp's grocery market. Members of his family blocked roads in Al Fawqani neighborhood and held a protest. The source adds that the Palestinian follow-up committee has held contacts to bring life back to normal in the area. Ain al-Helwe, the largest Palestinian camp in the country, is home to about 50,000 refugees and is known to harbor extremists and fugitives. Future Bloc MP Fouad Sanyura also condemned yesterday's suicide bombing in Hirmid. He reiterates that steps must be taken to distance Lebanon from the repercussions of the Syrian conflict. For his part, Maronite Patriarch Bashar al-Ra'i holds the bickering politicians responsible for the deadly bombings targeting Lebanese cities and towns. In his sermon during Mass he celebrated in Kirki, al-Ra'i said the purpose of the government should be the human being and not the portfolios, in a veiled reference to Free Patriotic Movement leader Michel Aoun, who has been dubbed as the last person standing behind the failure to form the cabinet. Aoun has rejected a deal reached between rival parties on the rotation of portfolios in a 24-member cabinet based on the 888 formula. The UN Security Council has appealed to the Lebanese people to preserve national unity despite consistent attempts to undermine the country's stability in the wake of the deadly bombing in Hirmid. Both the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the Security Council strongly condemned what they called the terrorist attack. In a press statement issued in New York, the 15-member body said the members of the Security Council underlined the need to bring the perpetrators to justice. The Council members also reaffirmed the need to combat terrorism in all its forms in accordance with the United Nations Charter and all obligations under international law. They stressed the importance for all Lebanese parties to respect Lebanon's policy of dissociation and to refrain from any involvement in the Syrian crisis, consistent with their commitment to the Babda Declaration. The U.S. Embassy in Lebanon also condemned the bombing and extended its condolences to the victims and their families. One person was killed and another injured in gun battles that rocked the northern city of Tripoli. The national news agency says Omar Hameidan succumbed to his injuries, while another person from the Habib family was wounded in the clashes, which pitted rival families in the city's internal markets. Several cars were torched and houses and shops were damaged by gunfire and rockets. The source says the army contained the fighting and chased the gunmen and set up checkpoints to prevent the renewal of tension. Syrian activists say fighters linked to al-Qaeda have killed 26 people, including the military leader of a rival group, in a double car bombing near the northern city of Aleppo. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that the attack late last night was carried out by the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. The Syrian rebel group, known as the Liwa Tawhid, said their commander Adnan Bakur was killed. Liwa Tawheed or Unity Brigade is among a coalition of rebel groups that has for weeks been fighting the ISIL. The monitoring group also reported that at least 115 people, including 65 civilians, 10 of whom were children, were killed on Saturday when explosive-backed barrels were used in a regime air raid in Aleppo. The attack also killed members of the Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's official affiliate in Syria. Speaking during the Middle East panel at the Munich Security Conference in Germany, Saudi Prince Turki bin Faisal accused Syrian President Bashar al-Assad of genocide against his people and most of the rest of the world of complicity in it.
I accuse the Bashar regime of genocide and crimes against humanity, and I accuse Iran of being complicit and supporting Bashar in this effort. I also accuse the Russian Federation of continuing to provide arms and weaponry and advice to Bashar. I accuse China of following Russia in the Security Council and vetoing any effort to put an end to the fighting in Syria. I accuse the West in general, with the exception of France, of being also reticent in providing help to the people of Syria.
Coming up next, at least 16 people are killed after an Indonesian volcano erupts. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Israeli Finance Minister Yair Lapid has decided to suspend the transfer of public funds to West Bank settlements, pending a probe into their alleged misuse. The move, announced late last night, was not expected to affect controversial plans for settlement expansion, which the Palestinians view as a major obstacle to U.S.-backed peace talks relaunched last year. Lapid's move came after he was informed that funds were allegedly transferred from settlements to the Yesha Council, which represents Israelis living in the West Bank. West Bank settlements receive compensation following the 10-month construction freeze of 2009 and 2010, which came as part of U.S.-led peace efforts. The funds were intended for security and the maintenance of schools and kindergartens. Moving on to Africa, South Sudan government forces have recaptured Lear, an important oil-producing area, and the hometown of nominal rebel leader Riek Machar in the northern oil-producing state of Unity. This is according to a spokesman for the rebels, who says that government soldiers and allied fighters advanced on Lear town, destroying everything on their path, and President Salva Kiir's forces burned down the whole of Lear town and the entire surrounding villages. He said that the government troops were attacking their positions in a deliberate attempt to derail peace talks, adding that the government troops were actively violating a ceasefire signed last week. There is no independent confirmation that Lear had been seized. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif have met on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference. The face-to-face came 2 weeks ahead of next week's round of talks on Iran's disputed nuclear program. Zarif says Iran is not prepared to give up research into centrifuges, machines that purify uranium, as part of a final deal to address international concerns over its nuclear activities.
Well, it's just the beginning of the negotiations for a final agreement. It's the first step of the final step, and I expect it to take some time. Of course, in our view, it's not that difficult to reach an agreement, provided there is good faith and the willingness on the part of all parties to try to examine various options to address the common objective of the Iranian nuclear program being exclusively used for peaceful purposes. We are ready because we believe it is in our interest and we have no other intention. So theoretically, it shouldn't be that difficult. The detail may be a bit more difficult to achieve. So we'll see.
Anti-government protesters have made their presence felt in Thailand's national elections, blockading polling stations and forcing about 1 in 10 across the country to close. Voting ended at 8 a.m. local time, but no results will be announced. Further voting is already scheduled for February the 23rd after problems with advanced polling last Sunday. While the ballot in some southern areas may not happen for weeks, the vast majority of voting stations were open and polling proceeded relatively peacefully. but the risk of violence remained high a day after gun battles in North Bangkok left 7 people wounded. The protests were organized by opponents of the government of Yingluck Shinawatra, who decided to go ahead with the polls despite official advice not to do so in the face of widespread opposition. The national focus today was on the capital, where the main protests were being held. Several skirmishes broke out between protesters and frustrated would-be voters. And now for news around the world in brief. Riot police and anti-fascist protesters in Greece have clashed in central Athens, leaving at least 2 people injured. Police say more than 3,000 supporters of the extreme right Golden Dawn Party held a rally to commemorate a 1996 dispute over an uninhabited Aegean Sea island that brought Greece and Turkey to the brink of war. The rally was largely peaceful, but violent clashes were triggered by the counter-demonstration staged by leftist groups protesting against the Golden Dawn rally. Campaigning for the presidential elections in Afghanistan has begun, stained by the deaths of 2 aides for the frontrunner in a gun attack. Local police say they will do everything to ensure security as the April 5 polls near. The spring elections mark the first time in 13 years that Hamid Karzai, the incumbent, will not be on the ballots. The 11 candidates, whittled down from 27 in late October, include former ministers, governors, leading political opposition figures, and even an ex-royal. At least 16 people have been killed after an Indonesian volcano that has been rumbling for months now has witnessed a major eruption. Officials say among the dead of Mount Sinabung were a local television journalist and 4 high school students and their teacher who were visiting the mountain to see the eruptions up close. The eruption happened just a day after authorities allowed thousands of villagers who had been evacuated to return to Sinabung's slopes, saying that activity was decreasing. Masked men in combat gear have become a feature of the anti-government protest camp that has taken over central Kiev in Ukraine, but one stands out for his weapon of choice, the piano. A masked Ukrainian protester, calling himself the piano extremist, became a feature of Kiev barricades for playing piano to demonstrators to inspire them to victory. For the man whose impromptu performances on the frozen street outside City Hall have delighted fellow demonstrators, the paramilitary costume, like his stage name, is an ironic barb aimed at Ukrainian authorities who condemn those demanding closer ties with Europe as dangerous militants. Ukraine's opposition is planning new rallies to press for more concessions from the president, Viktor Yanukovych, including the immediate release of protesters and the formation of a new government. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton defends the EU's decision to refrain from putting in place sanctions against Ukraine, saying there are other ways in which the Union could help resolve the situation.
That's a completely false question. We've been talking with the opposition, both here and in Ukraine, about all of the ways in which we can support them. And it's often a false way to look at things, to just focus on one aspect of the kind of support that we can give the people of Ukraine. It's really important, first and foremost, that the violence in Ukraine stops and that they move to a constructive dialogue, look at the issues of constitutional reform, the role of Parliament, and moving forward so that people can have faith in the transparency and openness of the process. And this is the start of a process that we hope will bring a comprehensive agreement. So we'll be meeting to establish the issues that we need to discuss, to set our timeframes, and to begin that process when we get to the end.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. The Lebanese army says that more than 25 kilograms of explosives, rockets and grenades were used in yesterday's suicide bombing in Hermel. Mayor Patriarch Shadadahi and future Bloc MP Fuad Senura condemn Hermel's bombing, and Senura says steps should be taken to avoid the repercussions of a Syrian conflict. And Syrian activists say fighters linked to Al-Qaeda have killed 26 people in the northern city of Aleppo. Those are your Sunday headlines from us here at Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, wishing you all a very nice evening.
لا القتال ولا السلاح ولا المتهمين باختيار في حل